I take this time, and some of my colleagues will be joining me, to express our concerns about the first major bill that has been brought to the floor under the Republican leadership dealing with the Keystone pipeline. I want to first start by talking about the so-called urgency for us to take this issue up and circumvent the normal process. And the normal process would be for this matter to continue through the regulatory review, which is there to protect the public interest, and to short-circuit that and in an unprecedented way for Congress to approve a site for a pipeline. That's not the way it's done. So in order to consider this, there must be some urgency. Well, first, let me just share with my colleagues what the American people are currently experiencing on the price of gasoline at the pump. It's at an historic low over the last 5 years, at $2.19, the average price for gasoline at the pump. So there's certainly not an urgency if we're talking about trying to get more oil in the pipelines for the cost of energy. And by the way, I think we all understand that our actions here in this Congress will have very little to do with the availability of oil in the near term. It will take some time to construct the pipeline and for it to have an impact on the level of oil that's available. The second issue that I find somewhat puzzling on the urgency of this issue, and some of my colleagues have pointed it out on both sides of this issue, is that there is already a pipeline that's available that could be used. Admittedly, it's not as efficient as what they're trying to do with the Keystone, and that is to make tar sand, the most dirty oils we have, more economically available, feasible to be transported. That makes little sense under today's economics, and the price of gasoline makes it even more hard to understand. So this construction of this pipeline, the approval by this Congress, will have very little to do with the consumer availability of energy here in the United States. Now, that's compounded by the fact that we're talking about Canadian oil, the dirtiest oil, tar sand oil, that's being transported through the United States because Canada doesn't want to transport it through their own country because of their concerns on the environmental side, which ends up in Texas, at the Port Arthur, Texas refinery. Now, for those who are not familiar, that's a foreign tax zone which is tax-free. So the oil can therefore go into the international marketplace in a very easy manner. And Valero, who is one of the potential consumers of this oil, is building export facilities in order to handle more export in the international communities. And none of us can speak with any definitive judgment as to how much of this oil will in fact end up in the United States. But the fact that they're transporting it to a southern port, they're not transporting it to a refinery in the Midwest, which would be a lot closer and a lot cheaper, is a clear indication that this oil will end up in the international marketplace and have very little to do with energy security here in the United States. I think we've got to make that clear. So here we are bypassing the normal process. We're doing it for allowing Canadian oil to enter the international marketplace more efficiently with risk to the United States with very little benefit. Why are we doing all this? Well, we can hear, okay, there's jobs. I'm for job creation. I would like to see us work on a transportation bill where we can create millions of jobs in a far more harmonious way than we can with Keystone. I'm for clean energy policies which have proven effect that will create great jobs here in the United States, permanent jobs here in the United States. But the Keystone pipeline, the estimates are that it creates literally a few thousand construction jobs. They're temporary jobs. They're not permanent jobs. The number of permanent jobs are a handful. So this isn't about jobs here in the United States. It's not about energy security here in the United States. What is this all about? Very little benefit for the risk factors in the United States. And let me talk about the risk factors. because this is what I think gets most of us most concerned. The risk factors are the environmental risk factors that have us the most concerned. The way you extract tar sand, tar sand is is a bulky type of product that is literally mined and then transported into a crude oil, which is very, very thick and dirty. Now, there are different ways in which you can get to that tar sand, but one way to get to that tar sand is to take the topsoil off the property and mine it through a strip mining process. That's been done in Canada. It's still being done in Canada. And it does cause tremendous environmental damage. It is, in and of itself, a process that I would think most of us would want to avoid. And yet, this legislation does nothing to prevent that type of processing of the tar sands. The tar sands produce a very thick oil product that can only make its way through the pipelines by it being processed. And it creates additional risk factors because of the way that it is processed. There have been oil spills of tar sand. We've seen it in Arkansas, we've seen it in Michigan. It caused devastating damage. Devastating damage. It's not easy to clean up. It's not like normal crude. It causes permanent type damages to a community, as we saw most recently in Michigan. So there are risk factors involved here for the United States to take Canadian oil to make it easier to reach the international marketplace, unlikely to end up in the United States, creating few permanent jobs. Quite frankly, a lot of us quite don't understand this. And then, as I said, it's dirty oil. The use of this tar sand oil produces a much larger carbon footprint than other crude oils, causing us additional problems in dealing with climate change. We have a serious issue with what's happening in our environment. I'm proud to represent the state of Maryland. Most of the people in my state live in coastal areas. They know the consequences of global climate change. They understand that. They know what's happening along the coast. They know we're at risk. They understand the fact that we have inhabitable islands in the Chesapeake Bay that have disappeared and are disappearing. They understand that our seafood crops, the blue crab, is threatened because of the warming of the water affects seagrass growth, which is critically important for juvenile crabs to survive. They understand that. They get that. And they want us to be responsible in dealing with climate change. They also know that we're getting a lot more extreme weather here on the east coast of the United States and throughout our country. They know on the west coast they're getting the dry spell and the wildfires. They understand the risk factor. They understand the cost to America of not dealing with climate change issues. The costs that involve not only in direct damage that's caused, but also in the global consequences of climate change. So we are worried about our carbon footprint. We are proud that the United States is joining other countries in dealing with the climate issues. And I applaud the work of President Obama in the most recent international meetings that dealt with climate change issues. We need to do a better job. So why is the tar sands an issue? Because tar sands produce more carbon emissions than other types of oil. It's about 81% higher than the average use of crude oil and 17% higher than the well-to-wheels basis of producing oil. Well, that's of concern. That translates into millions and millions of cars. The difference between that and having millions of cars on the roads. It's an important part of our leadership. So if we're trying to establish international credibility, and then we facilitate more of this dirty tar sand oil, what message is that sending? What type of cooperation do we expect to receive? So, Mr. President, I'm trying to figure out why this is the priority of this new leadership in the United States Senate, why this is the very first bill that we've seen come to the floor of the United States Senate, which, as I pointed out earlier, there seems to be no urgency. I was told, well, it's been delayed and delayed and delayed. The reason it was delayed is because the construction operator firm changed the routes. They did their one route, and they didn't check, didn't have alternatives. It violated state laws. They had to adjust routes. And now they're wondering, because they've changed the route, why it's taking longer. It's not the governmental process. It's been the fact that the proposers of this route did not have their ducks lined up in order before they submitted the route that could be approved. And we're not still sure about that. And one of the points I want to bring out on process, as I said earlier, trying for Congress to dictate where a pipeline should be is wrong. That's not our role. We should let the regulatory process, which is there to protect the public, go forward. But it would also trample on state rights. There are some serious legal challenges pending in state courts as to the actions of governors in dealing with a location issue. That should be resolved by the courts. We're pretty close to having that. It's very unclear to me what impact this legislation would have on states' rights as it's currently being litigated in the state court. So why are we doing that? So the delays have been caused because of the way this pipeline was suggested. The regulatory process is moving forward that would protect the public safety. There's no urgency considering where oil prices are today and gasoline at the pump. There's serious environmental risk issues. And I understand the State Department report's been mentioned frequently, but look at the State Department report. Look at what it's saying about the price of oil. The per barrel price of oil was a lot higher when they did that report. The lower costs have a major impact on what we're talking about here. So I would urge my colleagues to let the process go forward. I thank the President for spelling out his concerns and his desire to let the regulatory process reach its conclusion, let the state court decision go forward as to what the state believes is the right thing to be done here. And all of that, I think, will give us a much better process than us trying to substitute our judgment for what should be done through a regulatory process. And Mr. President, I'm going to close by quoting from one of the individuals from Nebraska who's been very active on this, Ben Gottschall. He said, "The Cowboy Indians Alliance shows our cooperation and our working together in mutual respect. That shared bond proves that we pipeline fighters are not just a few angry landowners holding out or environmentalists pushing a narrow agenda. We are people from all walks of life and include the people who have been here the longest and know the land the best." I think that's pretty instructive. This is a broad coalition that is concerned about the actions that are being contemplated here in the United States Senate. Actions that would overrule landowner rights. Actions that would take away state rights. Actions that would shortcut regulatory process. Actions that help private companies directly without taking into account the regulatory protections that are provided under law. It seems rather unusual that this would be the very first issue where we could work together in a bipartisan way to expand opportunities for energy here in the United States. Clean energy produces a lot more jobs, and we could be talking about incentives so we could have a larger production of clean energy here in the United States. There, Democrats and Republicans would clearly work together, ways that we can have more efficient use of energy. Democrats and Republicans can clearly work together in that regard. There's so many areas that we could work on together and show the American people that we understood their frustration with Congress's failure to deal with many issues in the last Congress. But instead, it looks like we're picking an issue that's more special interest than it is one that will help deal with an energy problem in the United States and has the potential to broaden our environmental challenges here in the United States. And for all those reasons, Mr. President, I hope my colleagues will reject this approach and let us go back to work together to find a common way that we can help deal with our environment.